They knew we were there. This happened when I was 15, near Algonquin Park. My father and I were driving up to our cottage in the middle of winter. I was always so amazed at the beauty of Algonquin Park and Muskoka, and had grown up enjoying the beauty of it every summer. Our cottage was on a large lake, about a 30-minute drive from the nearest town. There were probably 1,000 cottages on the lake. During the summer, the lake and town's population tripled. It was cottage country, so people would spend all summer enjoying the lake and warm nights around campfires with family and friends. I spent every summer there growing up, and it still brings fond memories of sunshine, laughter, and the sound of motorboats on the lake. But the winters were different. The people that didn't live there all year would venture back home to the city life, leaving the area mostly deserted, with cottages boarded up for the winter. There were a few people that would still frequently come up every couple of months for a few days or so, but for the most part, the lake was silent during the winters, and the town was just filled with locals. The beautiful pine trees are always covered with snow, making the forest quiet. Our cottage was on a dead-end road. There were about 20 other cottages on the road, with ours being somewhat in the middle. The cottages were quite spaced out, however, with our closest neighbors being too far away to see through the trees. My dad had needed to head up to the cottage to do some painting that my mom had been bugging him to do. It was the end of February, and it was a long weekend, so I tagged along so he wouldn't be alone, and we could spend some quality time together. It was a 5-hour drive from our home, but turned out to be an 8-hour drive due to the heavy snow. It had gotten dark out quite early, and it was around midnight as we drove through Algonquin Park. It was deadly quiet and pitch black except for the headlights of the car. We finally passed through the park with only 30 minutes left to get to the cottage, and it had stopped snowing, so we were both eager to get there. As we turned onto the familiar road, I remember my dad cursing. It hadn't been plowed yet. This wasn't surprising. However, it probably wouldn't be until later the next day that we would even see a snowplow. As we drove down the road, I noticed there was a fresh set of tire tracks. The Smiths must be back up for the weekend, my dad said. All of a sudden, as we drove around the bend following the tire tracks, the headlights of the car shone on a white van that was parked on the side of the road. It was almost hidden by the vast trees that were covered with snow. "What the?" my dad mumbled. As we drove past the white van, I remember looking back through the back window and very clearly saw 2 figures in the front seat, illuminated by our retreating taillights. I told my dad this, and he shrugged. "Maybe they're lost." I nodded, but I couldn't help to think how this was a dead-end road and why they would feel the need to park there. As we pulled into our driveway and started bringing our stuff in, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I couldn't stop thinking about that van and why it was there, with 2 people just sitting in the dark in the middle of the night. It spooked me so much that I begged my dad to let me sleep upstairs with him, instead of sleeping downstairs in the room my sister and I usually shared. It had big windows, with no blinds that looked out into the darkness of the forest, and my 15-year-old self was already scared of the dark, even without seeing the white van. It wasn't a big deal when my sister was there, but not tonight. As my dad got ready for bed, I sat in the living room reading a book. My dad had turned all the lights off, and I was just using a small lamp next to the couch and trying to get through one last chapter before bed. It was so quiet I could almost hear my ears ringing. I also started to get that feeling that I was being watched. The living room had large windows that overlooked the lake, and it was black except for a light or two from cottages across the lake. I shut off the lamp and got up. Now that the cottage was dark, the moon was shining brightly, illuminating the snow. It was beautiful, and I walked towards the window to get a better look. Movement caught my eye, and I remembered my heart dropping as I saw 2 figures down by the back porch, below the window, barely hidden by the surrounding trees. I dropped to the floor and crawled towards the bedroom where my dad was sleeping, my heart in my throat. I wasn't sure if they had seen me or not. I woke my dad up, and by the time he got to the window, the 2 figures were gone. Where I had seen the figures, 2 sets of footprints in the snow led back around to the front of the cottage and back down the driveway. I begged my dad not to go outside. He double-checked the locks and turned on the porch lights to hopefully scare anyone off. My dad wasn't as freaked out as I was, but still set the alarm before he headed back to bed. I remember being very freaked out, and I laid there all night next to my dad, terrified I'd look out the window and see someone staring back at me. The next morning, my dad went outside and confirmed that there were 2 sets of footprints leading from the road to behind our cottage, and then back to the front of the cottage, and back up to the road. There were tire marks that showed that the vehicle had turned around and then gone back up to the main road. My dad guessed that they were probably looking to break in and steal stuff, as it was the middle of winter and not too many people were up at the lake. But they knew we were here. They would have seen our tire tracks leading to our cottage. and my dad's car parked out front. They also may have seen the lamp that I had turned on to read, and or saw it go off. My dad didn't have an answer to that, and after much back and forth, he called the non-emergency line and reported it. Apparently there had been some break-ins in the area, and some stuff had been stolen from cottages that were boarded up for the winter. But again, I still wonder to this day, why would they have been interested in stealing from a house that clearly had people inside of it? After this experience, I don't trust myself in nature ever again. I grew up in Vietnam. My family is very affluent, so we had just about 10 acres of land all to ourselves. No one else really lived here, except for a house here and there. Our closest neighbors were like 3 miles away. Our territory wasn't gated except for a smallish brick wall, and we had a ton of street dogs that we adopted that kinda just roamed around. I was under strict instructions to never go anywhere past these certain trees that were marked, and once sunset started, I couldn't go past the West Territory. Now I want to say that in Vietnam, people are very superstitious. It's not so much whether you believe in the paranormal or not, but whether if it can harm you. Whenever I walked past these trees, the dogs would furiously bark, and if you would drag me by my shirt, or even go back to my family's workers and kind of tell on me, I always assumed that this was because I was very young, so they didn't want me to wander off and get lost. But when I was 13, I became more and more interested. My family went to a funeral while the workers still worked and my grandmother watched me. My grandmother was a very old woman, and I was a very sneaky child. Obviously, I snuck off, and while I was wandering through the woods, I saw pythons, lizards, water monitors, and monkeys. Here's the weird thing. I felt like the whole time, these animals were kind of leading me to something, if that makes sense. I distinctly remember the first animal that I saw was a huge dragonfly. It led me past the marked trees on the east side of my territory, and then I saw a frog that had a really weird texture to it, very rough, kind of lizard-like. I felt like I was in a trance-like state, and each animal transformed into another animal. Then I began to come to the realization that these weren't different animals, but the same one transforming. I didn't see it transform, but it could be like a monitor lizard, and then it would go past a rock, and the next animal would be a huge python. I should also mention that all of my dogs were fiercely protective of me and trailed me like shadows. All of the workers always said that wherever I walked, a horde of dogs would follow, and when I slept at night, they would all sleep directly outside of my window. However, less and less dogs followed me as I got deeper into the woods. By the time I saw the monitor lizard, I'm pretty sure only a handful were still with me. Most stayed back after the first few trees. I realized it was getting really dark, but the sky looked weird for some reason. I stopped following the animal, which was a monkey at this point, and just turned back. But getting back was a lot more difficult than getting there. When I was following the creature, it felt like the woods were kind of just opening up a trail for me. Like I didn't trip on any shrubs or vines, and nothing really blocked my way. But the way going back, I was convinced that the woods had completely changed. I wasn't really scared, just a little cold since I believed I didn't even wander off that far. But eventually I heard some dogs barking and followed. Then I could see my house. Everyone was frantic when I came back. They had about 100 people searching for me, and a few more people like extended family of workers that had owed favors to my family. Apparently I had been missing for 3 days, and the husband of one of my aunt's workers went in after me, but he's been missing since then. Then I got really scared, and told my family what happened. Then, their faces went white. We drove to a very popular Buddhist temple, and we got blessed. The monks told my family what they believed happened, while I stood outside eavesdropping with my older cousin. Our family has a problem with people going missing. My grandmother's brother said that he felt like he was being guided with a hand on his back, and he was stuck between 2 rocks. His old black dog found him. It's a common belief in Vietnam that all black dogs are very powerful and can scare spirits away, which explains why my uncle has always picked all black dogs. My grandma's first son was playing in a creek while she traveled a little downstream to do laundry, and she said that it seemed like someone pushed him in while holding his head down, and as she tried to run to him, something in the water wrapped around their foot. A villager nearby ran down to save him. The monks gave me a Buddha necklace that they blessed, and I still wear the necklace today. The man that went missing while looking for me was never found, although my mom told me that he was. I believe my aunt paid the wife a large sum of money and bought them a house far away, and even still sends money to them regularly. A few days after this, the workers started chopping down the trees, and a fence was built around the east side of our territory. Then we started a karaoke bar that now resides there. What do I believe happened? I have many theories, but I think the spirits are upset that my grandmother came to their land and built over it. Before my family cut down the trees and built our house there, no one lived there. I think they were upset that we disturbed their peace and quiet. I still don't like hiking to this day, and when I do go, it's never a very far hike, and I don't let my dog go off leash because I'm terrified. Growing up in the Appalachian Mountains. I could give you a million times as a kid and young adult that I felt scared or paranoid playing in the woods. It's a beautiful place, and I spent my entire childhood getting lost out there by myself or with friends. As a kid, we never got too far out there, but you could actually see the progression of us venturing further and further out as we got older because of the forts and carvings we would leave. This one particular time, like 1,000 times before, my friend and I had just graduated high school. It was our last summer of freedom, and we spent the entire summer camping and hiking out there. We decided to try and find a new place to set up camp and walked for what felt like a few miles before we came to a nice clearing. The area was relatively new to both of us. We got the camp set up and fire going. The plan was to wait until nightfall, smoke some weed, and play Monopoly. For sake of backstory on my friend and I, my buddy is smaller, a real goofy guy, but comes from a family of foresters and always had a deep understanding of all the trees and different plants he came across. He had no fear of going and camping out by himself. If I spent 1,000 hours in the woods, he probably spent 50,000. As for me, I'm a taller, sturdier guy, and as I got older, I spent more time worried about women and sports, and the woods became a small place for parties. Also, I never had the balls to camp out alone. In fact, older me wouldn't go at all when I was alone, because I could never shake the feeling of being watched, which was just paranoia, but still an uneasy feeling. Anyways, camp is set, fire is going, but it's getting lower and needs wood. Sun is down and we're both cutting up and having a good time. My friend is sitting on a little chair he always brought and loading up a makeshift bong. I was crouched breaking some excess limbs off of the logs we had gathered for the fire. All of a sudden, this strong breeze cut through the clearing. I couldn't tell you if it was the suddenness of it or what, but my friend and I both stopped immediately and looked at each other. The breeze went just long enough to flicker our fire down to a small flame. We both sat completely in almost total darkness. Neither of us said a word. Across from us on the other side of the fire, we could hear footsteps. They sounded like somebody was running and would slow to a walk and then run again. Definitely on two legs. By the sound of it, they were pacing back and forth over the same spot. Then, just like it started, it stopped. With a softer crunch on the underbrush. I knew by the sound that it had taken a crouch. I was crouched still, and I knew I was staring right at it in the dark. My friend grabbed my shoulder and said, "Buddy." And when he did, I felt this surge of fear come over me. I could feel it, and I could hear it in him. I had been so fixed on the footsteps and rationalizing what I had heard that I hadn't even considered being afraid. But this was true fear. It was raw. It made me feel helpless. I could hear my friend grab some leaves after a while, and he dropped them on the fire. For the split second the leaves covered the fire, we were in pure darkness. Then the fire sprang to life. We both quickly grabbed more leaves and brush and threw it on the fire. I got some sticks and logs on there, and neither of us took our eyes off the spot or moved much for over an hour. Finally, the leaves crunched, and it slowly walked off. Whatever it was had sat crouched watching us without moving for far longer than any animal would. It wasn't until the footsteps disappeared that I realized the smell had disappeared as well. It smelled like a paper mill. Spoiled eggs almost. For the rest of the night, besides whispering remarks, neither of us really moved or stopped looking at the spot. Nobody went into the tent, and I had very short light sleep sitting on the ground with my head rested on my hands. My friend never went to sleep. In the morning, we packed up and silently walked back home. To this day, we talk about it. In the 7 to 8 years since it happened, my forester friend has not camped out by himself ever since. Every story and author is linked in the description.